The crowd held its breath. A drunken tourist, completely unaware of what he was doing, spat directly at a guardsman, a man who could hold back an entire army. Everyone froze. He thought nothing would happen to him. But when the guardsman took a step forward and raised the butt of his rifle, no one expected what happened next. In the next second, the tourist was on the ground and everything around him exploded with noise and laughter. But what happened afterwards shocked everyone, even those who thought they had seen everything. But let's start at the beginning. It happened early in the morning, right in the heart of London, at the gates of Buckingham Palace. As every day, dozens of tourists were gathered around the palace. Some were taking photos, some were filming videos on their phones, children were gazing at the guards in their red uniforms and bearskin hats. Everything was following its usual routine: quiet admiration, the soft murmur of the crowd, the flash of smartphone lenses. The changing of the guard had already begun: precise movements, impeccable posture, silent dignity. It was at that moment that one of the tourists, stumbling and waving a plastic bottle, stepped out of the crowd. His name was Jason Miller, a U.S. citizen who had arrived in London that very morning. Judging by his appearance, he had already started celebrating the beginning of his trip right from the airplane's stairs. His face was red, his eyes were wandering, and his walk was unsteady. He was the type who thought a tourist visa was a pass to do whatever he wanted. "I pay, I can do anything," his behavior seemed to say. Jason squeezed his way through the crowd, getting closer to the barrier. He stepped over the rope that marked the restricted area and stood just half a meter away from the royal guard. The guard, as expected, did not react. He stood perfectly still, eyes forward, hands on the rifle, his face a mask of concentration. Jason snorted, took out his phone, and turned on the camera, recording a story. "Look at this guy. Is he even real?" he said, turning to his followers. He took a step forward. His breath was now on the guard's face. Jason looked at him, smiled, and spat right in the center of the guard's red parade uniform. For a split second, everything stopped. The crowd's noise went silent, as if the sound was turned off. Someone among the tourists gasped. Someone swore sharply. Someone instinctively reached for their camera and began filming. It felt like time had stretched out, and suddenly, London no longer felt like a tourist postcard. Jason stood right in front of the guard, his confident smirk never leaving his face. He felt like the master of the situation, the guy who just had to be the center of attention. There was a fire in his eyes, one that was almost wild. This wasn't just drunk arrogance, it was something much darker, a disrespect that had become his second nature. "This guy ain't even real. Watch this," he yelled loudly, not so much to the guard, but to the crowd. He paused, looking around, almost expecting some kind of approval. A few people exchanged puzzled glances, but most just quietly turned away, embarrassed. Some even lifted their smartphones, filming like they were watching a show, hoping for another moment to share on social media. In response to his shout, the guard stayed completely still, like a statue. Silent and emotionless, his face showed nothing that could be understood. For Jason, this was a real irritation. He couldn't accept that someone, even in a uniform, could just stand there, ignoring his provocations. He was sure of one thing: this guy wasn't here to protect, he was just a background prop, a static decoration against the royal residence. After all, what could he do? Anyone who doesn't move, doesn't exist. Jason took a step forward again, his hand reaching out, his fingers almost touching the red uniform, aiming for the medal. He wanted to touch it, as if doing so would somehow allow him to humiliate everything that was tied to this man, this country, its traditions. But just as his hand was almost there, the crowd began to vibrate with tension. People started turning away, and in their eyes, there was something more than just displeasure, it was disgust. It was as if some invisible barrier had been broken, and the atmosphere filled with a heavy condemnation. Those who had been laughing earlier were silent now. Many people started to nervously snort, and a few even took out their phones, not to film the moment, but to escape from it. Some winced, like they were smelling something unpleasant. Even the most curious spectators couldn't mask the growing negative vibe spreading through the crowd. And then, right at that moment, when his hand was almost on the medal, the guard moved. Not physically. His eyes became sharper, more focused, as if, for the first time, after all the insults and taunts, he had finally seen. It was a momentary shift, so sharp that it instantly filled the space with silence. But right then, Jason realized he might be wrong. He could do whatever he wanted, but he didn't know what would happen if he continued. And then, the moment came. Against the backdrop of silence and growing tension, with all eyes in the crowd fixed on Jason, a sharp, loud voice suddenly cut through the air, "Stand back from the king's guard." The guard, a tall, imposing man named Ethan Turner, took a step forward. His movements were confident and precise, like those of a well-trained soldier. The rules he followed didn't allow for aggression or intrusion on his personal space, especially when the royal family and thousands of tourists were watching. His voice rang out as though restraining this warning wasn't just a desire, but a necessity. The words, spoken with cold determination, came out like a command. He wasn't here to tolerate disrespect. For him, this scene wasn't a show, it was an honor and a duty to protect what he stood for. But Jason didn't get it. In his drunken state, he just smirked, expecting this to be part of the act. He couldn't believe someone would dare react to his antics. He was certain the world revolved around him and his rights. He didn't sense that anything could possibly go wrong. But Ethan Turner wasn't just a man in a fancy uniform. He was a guardsman. A man ready to defend his position and his honor. At the moment Jason thought he could get away with it, a loud thud echoed as the rifle's buttstock hit his chest. The cold metal followed. That single blow was enough to push Jason backward. He was completely unprepared for such a turn of events. The push was powerful. He flew back as though he had collided with a brick wall. His legs lost their footing, and, stumbling, he crashed onto the cobblestones, the dull thud of his fall reverberating in the air. The entire moment was over in an instant, but it left an indelible impression, filling the space with the echo of what had just happened. The crowd gasped. Some sighed in relief, others could barely believe their eyes. Even those who had laughed before, now they froze. Only a few continued filming the incident, but not with the same cheer as before. The man who had been the center of attention just moments ago was now the object of awkward, even pitiful, observation. But some in the crowd couldn't hold back and began to applaud. These were the people who felt this was inevitable. Perhaps they were moved by how, despite all his restraint, the guardsman had shown that you can't just mess with the traditions and dignity of the country. Jason was stunned. He didn't immediately understand what had happened. He tried to get up, gripping the cobblestones for support, but his body was completely disoriented. He even tried shouting something, seemingly hoping someone would raise his status and put him back at the center of attention. He felt he had to continue the argument, to assert his rights and dignity. But something was wrong, and now, in his voice, there was no confidence, only confusion. That's when the security stepped in. It all happened so fast. As soon as the security arrived, the situation changed in an instant. Two guards, dressed in sharp uniforms and moving like a well-oiled machine, rushed toward Jason, giving him no chance to resist. One grabbed him by the arm, the other by the neck. Their holds were so professional and swift that, to anyone watching from the outside, it looked like the final act of an entire performance. Jason didn't have time to process anything before he was squeezed into their grasp. He tried to say something, but his words came out slurred, as if he realized that nothing could save him now. He mumbled in a disjointed manner, "I didn't know," trying to justify himself, but it sounded as ridiculous as his actions. "I was just joking," he tried again, hoping someone would understand. "It's for the video." His last attempt at an excuse, one that he seemed to think would make everything okay. But no one was listening. They'd all already figured out what was really happening, and now he was simply the object of their disgust. The crowd continued to watch, but it all seemed like a silent show where the main actor had been exposed. The guards quickly escorted him outside the royal grounds. They moved without paying any attention to his pathetic attempts to justify himself, giving him no chance to escape or resist. He was like someone in a daze, not fully realizing his defeat but more aware that he had been the center of attention, only to suddenly become the most hated person in that very place. The crowd parted as the guards moved forward, like a river flowing around a dam. But the people's attention didn't fade. Everything had been filmed, and there was something like satisfaction in their eyes. Some remained silent, others couldn't help but laugh, and a few called out approving remarks. "Well done, mate," echoed through the crowd, and the response was sincere. For many in the audience, this was a moment of justice. "That's what you get," someone else added, their words filled with joy that the offender had finally faced the consequences. It felt like a reward for everyone watching the scene unfold. Everyone knew he had crossed the line, and now he would bear the responsibility for it. As for the guardsman, calm, composed, still as grim and unmoving as ever, he remained in his spot. His face showed no emotion. He was part of the system, a part of the unshakable wall that stood firm, no matter what. He stood there as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't been involved in this moment, even though it was his actions that ultimately closed the chapter on this conflict. Later, it was revealed that Jason had been detained and fined for disorderly conduct. But his attempts at an explanation were already meaningless. His actions weren't just a breach of the rules, they had become a symbol of how someone's arrogance could clash with boundaries that simply couldn't be crossed. The video of his incident quickly went viral, spreading across the internet like a swift, vivid warning to anyone who might consider repeating his mistakes.